morning. I'm calling to order for the Board of Selectmen the joint meeting Saturday, January 27, 2018 of the Board of Selectmen, the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, Zoning Board of Appeals, Board of Health, Affordable Housing Committee, Water Quality Management Committee. And if all the chairs, after we call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order, starting from that end, would just go around and call your meetings to order as well. And board chairs.
I'll call to order the Conservation Commission to the January 27th joint board meeting.
I'll call to order the Affordable Housing Committee joint board meeting. Nice, very nice.
Call to order the Planning Board joint meeting.
Water Quality Committee will be in order.
We'll call to order the January 27th joint meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Calling to order the Board of Health joint meeting, Town of Selectmen, and other boards.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for coming in on the weekend to continue our efforts at coordinating and economizing and really getting together on all of our goals. We have a long agenda plan, so we're going to move ahead fairly, pressing. Probably no more whistles, but other than that, we're going to be moving the meeting. If you want to speak, please be clear to get my attention, and any of us will kind of keep a list and move ahead. With respect to the initial presentation, the coordinating vision side by side of the Selectmen's annual strategic plan and Falmouth's local comprehensive plan, I want to give particular thanks to Charlotte Harris, to the chair, Jim, Pat Kerfoot. A number of people were instrumental in putting this together. And I know hopefully most of you received it ahead of time to get an overview. It's not really meant to be, a dissection and a complete side-by-side analysis. It's really a framework for the discussion to look at what we have in terms of commonalities and to bear in mind how we want to prioritize. So with that, Jim, if you want to kick it off.
Well, Charlotte was instrumental in putting this together. We worked going through both plans, and they're condensed versions, okay? It's not the whole thing. Anyone that's really interested in should go read either plan. They're posted on the town's website. This is just presented as an overview. So,
Next slide, Peter.
this is what the front screens look like. When you go online, you can see the Selectmen's plan and the local comprehensive plan. And Sue, you're going to go through the Selectmen's.
I'll jump in wherever you want, whatever's faster.
Well, I thought you were going to
Sure.
do the first part.
Okay.
All yourself, and I'll do the second.
All right, great. So with respect to the Selectmen's strategic plan, as you know, we meet every year and we try to take a policy overview of where the town should be going, what's already happening, how far we are with each goal. Next slide, please. Number one was to really produce a long-term strategic vision so that we can, have always remember, what the end goal is when you get really, enmeshed in the particularities and specifics. Prioritizing financial and economic stability and community development. Looking at new service delivery options so that we're not just doing, Xeroxing the same processes so that we can look for more modern and more integrated and efficient systems. We're optimizing the town's physical facilities.
So we need to have Peter advance the slide.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Peter. I'm just reading, so as I hit the headlines, just push it. So optimize town's physical facilities, I think is right
Next
before
one, Peter.
3. Next slide. Thank you, Julian. Along with that, supporting business and community development to sustain a vibrant local economy. That's what's happening all over the Cape. And there are things like money can be attracted with plans and sustainability options in terms of coastal resources, infrastructure, beaches. What we've been doing of late is really having the benefit of giving financial savings to homeowners on their home insurance. Further along, with respect to our tourism economy, we want to keep, and for our residents and taxpayers, we want to continue the high quality of our beach, wetland, estuary, and other coastal resources. And just we've got a coastal action committee now, so that we're taking the long-term studies and plans that we've done over the years, and we're actually looking at implementation. Looking at alternative energy sources, solid waste management, wastewater management really drives everything that we do, because if you don't start with a foundation that continues to clean our estuaries and our waterways, then we're missing the fundamental step, and we can't be building into our infrastructure without that initial coordination of wastewater management. And health and public safety, skipping to 6. We have a very substantial substance abuse crisis all over America, all over the Cape, including Falmouth. We're looking at addressing that going forward. And, as we, look at that very brief overview presentation, the Board of Selectmen, I think I speak, with everyone, we're trying to hone our information and to really surgically target things in the best order so that we get the best bang for the buck. And one of the things we're doing is next week, we're reaching out to the community and doing a listening session to be sure that what we're looking at in terms of strategic planning considers what the taxpayers, what the community thinks should also be a priority. So look for that next Saturday at Falmouth High at 8:30 in the morning. If you'd like to attend, it's definitely going to be appreciated for the board. It's a listening session, and we're hoping the community will be able to talk to each other and come to a certain sense of agreement in terms of these priorities. Jim?
Okay. The local comprehensive plan was started about 10 years ago. We've just finished in 2016 our revision of it. And some of the older points are still included in the new plan as we work through it, because this is meant to be, as opposed to the selectmen's 5-year plan, this starts in the short term but also goes in the long term, trying to take as long as a 50-year view on some of the things we're dealing with. So it has 8 elements. It's prepared by the planning board through its subcommittee, the local comprehensive plan committee. They meet most Wednesdays, and they're open meetings, and people are welcome to come. That's where this plan starts. The issues are brought up there, they're discussed there, they're packaged, brought to the planning board votes them, and then brings them to selectmen. We discuss them with the selectmen, and eventually they come to town meeting, and this plan, everything in our plan gets approved by town meeting. The beginning.
Goals and
the
policies.
Goals and policies, but we present the action items too.
Mm-hmm.
And the important thing about the action item is that's what everyone should be focusing on. Because these action items become, this is an overview, eventually become warrant articles. That's how it starts. In order to get, town meeting approves everything. This is an approved plan, it's done by town meeting, and all we do is facilitate it, bringing it forward with open meetings and bring it with the executive board and bringing it forward. And we deal with both short and long-term plans, and in our plan, you don't see it on this presentation, but it goes into detail as actually who is responsible for the action items. And then we do a review process. We call those people in and discuss with them how they're doing on their plan, whether we need more help from other areas. So it's an ongoing living plan. It just doesn't sit on a shelf. So it has a vision to maintain Falmouth's specialness, our natural resources, and to develop an appreciation for our distinctive character and our historic assets, and to sustain our economic viability. Under all is the land, and so that's our first process. We need to protect our natural and built resources, which our historic villages and centers are important. The complete streets is something that we try to look at every time we have a plan in front of us. Basically, going forward, we were originally developed as a town that is everything by cars, and everyone drove everywhere. Going in the future, we're not gonna be able to afford to do that. We'd have to pave the whole town. So we're looking for infrastructure with sidewalks, possibly public transportation. There's a complete streets state program.
Peter back.
And we try to incorporate into everything. Our policy is to analyze and update our zoning on an ongoing basis. We need to balance our convenient village locations with our open land. We need to encourage high-quality built environment and encourage density in some areas and discourage in others. And discourage development in some areas. Some of the action items we have in our land use is to create a farmland preservation trust, initiate land planning to control flooding. We need to update our transfer of development rights bylaw that will help us. And we need to increase industrial land going forward. And we need to set up a fund to buy vulnerable shoreline properties, because that's something that's always going to be happening in our future with climate change. The shore is always going to be changing. We should be prepared as a town to deal with it as we go forward, and not just deal with it when it happens. Next is transportation. We need to maintain what we have, support clean and low-impact transportation technologies, again, complete streets for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorized vehicles, and maximize regional transport, especially connections with train over the bridge and our highways. The policies that are increase local and regional transportation efficiency and flexibility. Budget life cycle maintenance for transportation infrastructure. You'll hear this life cycle maintenance throughout our plan. Basically, that means just don't approve a $1 million or a $10 million project that has a 20-year life, but have 20 years of maintenance cost approved as part of it to keep it going, and not just, because what happens to a town like ours, we get short of funds, we practice deferred maintenance, and then what doesn't do any good to have an asset you spent a lot of money on and you drive it into the ground by not maintaining it. And encourage alternative and environmentally sensitive modes of travel. We need to probably talk, we don't have a active transportation committee anymore. We probably should focus on making that happen. Everyone talks about our parking problems. Well, my own opinion, a lot of our board is you just can't keep paving everything and making more parking. We're gonna have to learn how to use what we have and share parking and bring people in from the schools and buses and move people around our downtown. And we don't have a plan for it, but we should. We need to protect the operational capacity of vulnerable infrastructure. This comes up all the time in our board, and we all should think about it. We always say, what's our most vulnerable spot? And we all go right away, Trunk River. We have a massive sewer line that's an eroding beach, and it's something we really, really need to pay attention to as we go forward. And we need to encourage our natural systems for resiliency. The Conservation Commission has told us over and over again, by having some of our wetlands act as shock absorbers when there is a major hurricane and flooding, that the water floods into the wooded wetlands and comes out slowly. If you just have buildings, it just bangs against them and comes right back out and washes it out. So we need to use what we have to survive as this climate change is coming towards us, and encourage community-wide institutional adaptability. Every single institution in our town has to be thinking about how to deal with this. The action items are to create a comprehensive wetlands restoration plan, to study rebuild by design. That's referencing some studies we've seen coming from after Hurricane Sandy in Long Island. They have some very innovative programs going down there where we have an opportunity to learn from them, and we're always watching that. And to encourage strong neighborhood and civic business networks. We are blessed with many, many associations in our town. And one of the things we've talked about with sustainability, if we are in a terrible hurricane or some other disaster, we already have networks of neighborhood associations that know everybody in it, And our idea is to try to reach out to them and have them, be communicating with us. So they're gonna know where everybody lives and who's in what old house, not old person in a house, not necessarily our boards, but we gotta take advantage of those institutions we have. And we need to constantly review the state codes and bylaws for resiliency and lobby for changes. One of the biggest problems we have is when a hurricane hits, our DPW is limited. They can only rebuild what they have. And if what they built wasn't adequate or resilient, they just put the same thing back in again, even though we know a better way to build it. This goes on and on and on. We need to break this cycle, and I think the only way to do it is build it right in the first build it right in the first place, so when it gets rebuilt, it'll last. So that's our bridges in some of our towns. If you live in East Falmouth, you would understand some of those bridges can greatly change your commute to downtown if they're not there. Water and wastewater. Biggest thing we did is we combined these two elements. It used to be two different elements. We decided since it's water, we put them together.
Page 11, Peter.
Thanks.
If you could actually tell me which page you're going to, that would help.
Thank you, Peter, we will.
Your pages
Yep,
don't,
that's it.
don't match his
Yep.
pages. But I've
You're in
got
charge of the
all right.
paging, okay?
You got it.
You watch me. So, for wastewater, to develop and protect the current future drinking water resources by buying land. One of the things we did in the local comprehensive plan is we met with Ray Jack and other people in the water department, and he identified where all our sources of water and the areas that we need to preserve. And it's really in the uplands. We all share the same watershed here, and we have to be real careful with it. So he's identified, and the town's engineers are well aware where all the wells are, and we need to protect them going forward. They're basically, most of them are further on the northern side of the town, up towards 151 and some of those areas. So we need to protect those at all costs. The good news is, as Ray did tell us, that as far in the foreseeable future, that we do have enough water if we take care of it. It's not like we're gonna run out. We could ruin what we have, but we have enough water right now, and that's the real key to take care of it going forward. So we need to explore regionalization of sewer treatment. That's ongoing right now. There's an article in the paper about it. And we need to distribute the cost of wastewater treatment fairly and equitably throughout the whole town. Some of the action items are already done. The first couple ones are already done. It goes to Long Pond. We need to...
11, bottom.
Different numbering system.
No, his, yeah. Sue's right, it's page 11.
But you know what? Peter, I think since we had to email this just minutes ago, maybe the pagination is different and we'll go by headings. So we're on, okay, good. Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead,
I
Jim.
think
We're
we're
just,
beyond that. We're a couple slides beyond that.
yeah.
Action items,
Yep, you got it.
implement.
Now go down to action
Yep.
items there.
There we go. Sorry. We need to, one of the things we learned, it's really state mandated, but we really have to maintain our groundwater, that any water that we use or get rid of, we have to make sure that the water table is maintained, and the state and our DPW watches that carefully. We need to investigate mechanisms to finance future water and sewer projects. We have, from what I can tell, we have another major sewer project on our works. Looks like the people have told us Green Pond, the only way to do it is another massive sewer project. So we got to be careful and be prepared to deal with that. And again, you'll see it's the theme throughout the whole thing, evaluate the full cost of maintaining the water and sewer system. This is an attempt to say, full lifetime budgeting. When you just don't spend the $40 million, make sure that there's a maintenance plan approved in the budget every year to maintain it and maintain it throughout its economic life. And don't defer maintenance. It happens when the state cuts our money and we don't have anything. And then we look at, how can we do it? Well, we had $100,000 here. Let's push it back, push it back. Do we still have a 100-year-old water main someplace in this town? I mean, that's the best example of I can see of how, as a town, we collectively have deferred maintenance and are sitting on a time bomb. And that's what we want to make sure if we do it, at least we know we're doing it and don't do it accidentally.
Next page.
Some of the things we've talked about is investigating reuse of non-potable water. In other areas of the country and in the world, they're doing desalination and taking actually wastewater and bringing it back to potable water. It will happen sometime in our future. This is a 50-year plan. That's why it's there, and we're always going to be looking at it. We need to develop an equitable sewer betterment policy for the town, for new and for the existing and the new ones going forward, and a conservation plan to establish standards for gray water recapture. Right now, I don't believe we do that. The gray water just goes right into our sewers. So that might be a way that we could conserve water in the future. Housing. This is the one we've ready. Housing, good.
Yeah, you're good.
Falmouth will have an attractive, desirable, and affordable housing and residential amenities for all people at all stages of life, for all abilities, lifestyles, and all incomes. This is something, we want to focus on housing and not just affordable housing. Affordable housing is very, very important, but we have to have housing for everybody in our town, and we wanted to make sure when we look at it, we take that into consideration. Our policies will be allowed for greater infill density where appropriate. Basically, in our land use, we talked about village centers, where our infrastructure is, where our sewers are, where our streets are, where public transportation is. That's the most economical. If we were to build massive housing expansion 2 or 3 miles or 4 miles away, we'd have to have buses, possibly sewer lines, water. We'd have to extend infrastructure all the way out to those areas. So if we're going to grow, the smartest way to grow is where we already have the infrastructure and take advantage of it that way. And we want to encourage the market to create multiple housing opportunities. We're hoping through changes in zoning, maybe overlay districts, that we can incentivize where if we want housing built in that areas, that the market could do it because our zoning and our planning will allow for it and let private investment come in and build some housing for us. And we need to provide housing for people of all stages of their lives, incomes. And this is a key point. Separate from the state affordable housing requirements, if we rely totally on the state for it, we're going to get what the state wants. Our idea is that this is a plan that we want. We should look at it, what we want for our town and our people so we can build it on our way. And that's a policy that we're trying to have going forward.
Next page. He's got it.
Some of the action items are already done. The housing study is something that most of us participated in. I know a few years ago, a lot of people, we saw you all at those meetings. It went on for a long time. We want to strengthen public and private partnerships to create more affordable housing. Explore tools to create increased housing choices by a by-right accessory apartment, which this is a goal that we made about 3 or 4 years ago, and we actually achieved it last year. The start of it, it's never finished. I don't know what to say. And then on economic sustainability.
Next slide.
We need to foster a climate for business, institutions, and the arts to thrive, provide infrastructure to meet the needs of the local and regional economy with the state and federal help, and promote educational partnerships to build strong labor force and to remain open to new ideas. If you ever come to we've actually had meetings with community colleges, state colleges. The local comprehensive plan reaches out to many, many different groups when this plan is put together. And I invite any of you that are interested to come participate. So the action item on first one is evaluates Falmouth municipal structure. The selectmen are working on this, have been for a while right now. Strengthen working relationships amongst the municipality, the Chamber of Commerce, and the EDIC. And determine if we should develop a redevelopment authority. And this is an ongoing discussion we're having all the time. It's moving slowly, but it's a discussion that we all should participate in going forward. Energy. We need to take personal responsibility to reduce energy use, encourage conservation, and work to achieve energy self-sufficiency. As policies, we need to provide municipal leadership in Falmouth's carbon footprint. We really need to know exactly what energy the town's using and how we can save it. We need to sort appropriate renewable energy sources and promote energy conservation whenever possible. The action items, a good goal is to always try to reduce our energy use by 2.5% a year. Compounding, that gets pretty big, but it's a good in the short term. I think it's something to work on. We need to explore opportunities. We need to add solar use analysis into site plan review whenever someone's coming up, encouraging. One of the things the planning board does is we get on commercial sites, we get to look at their plans, and we can encourage that. And that's good. And lastly, we'll get into historic character.
Yes?
We need to preserve Falmouth's community character through adaptive reuse of historic buildings, safeguard historic landscape, prevent development at odds with the village concept pattern of scaling, massing, and density. The policies here are to strive to preserve the historic structures,
Yep.
to build support for historic preservation, recognize that heritage tourism as a driver. Our town has always been a vacation or a tourism town, and that's something we just need to recognize and embrace. It has been that way for a long time, and hopefully always will be. And also to use a historic landscape approach. One of the things that came out of this is we're probably going to have to address our historic districts. We have historic districts that are sometimes 100 feet deep, and the historic building's 150 feet deep, and it's not protected. I mean, we need to take a look at that, and I believe the Historic Commission and every committees are looking at that, and we'll see that coming forward. The best example I know of is that we worked on the EDIC, the bus station. The bus station is in historic district. It's 115 feet back from the street. The district ends at 100. The bus station wasn't protected. So it's just a strange coincidence that happened. So we need a little retuning there. And some of the things, we need to also make sure that our own DPW respects the character of improving within our town infrastructure. I mean, I've seen sometimes where metal guard posts have been put in areas where it would have been much more appropriate to have wood, that kind of process. So it's just something we need to think of all around. We should consider finding some wayfinding methods throughout our town so visitors can see our historic districts and know when they're in them and visit some of our historic sites. And that pretty much wraps it up. Pat, you like to
I
add?
have one very quick statement. This was completed by the final town meeting vote in 2016. But we are currently in a review process. Transportation has been reviewed and updated, and that update is on the website. I really want to encourage all of you in particular to look at your own segment of this and get to it. Look at it, see whether things have been completed, see whether you want to add further action items to it. This is a living plan. It will be continually under review, and I really would thank you for your participation.
Okay, and now I'll ask Charlotte, who actually took on this whole process and put it all together for Sue and I, if she wouldn't mind doing a comparison of how much the plans actually are very much alike and are working together. Charlotte, can you take it from here?
No, you can see it there, and I hope you have a copy of it. This was born of a certain frustration on the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board, that a lot of effort by many of you actually goes into putting these plans together. But then they, once the process is through and that has a value, they don't get looked at, so that they're not in use and they don't reach the audience for whom they're intended, which is all of you and there are many other committees and organizations in town working on these things and may not realize the plans are here and could actually be guiding their work, or they might not know that their input is asked for in updating them. This is to show you how closely they're aligned, that the topics that are covered in the strategic plan that is done annually and updated, and the long-range plan that is also updated continuously, they're very much the same, so that you can see side to side that they're dealing with the same elements, but in a different time frame. Peter, if you could move forward one. I think if you can see the purpose and scope of each plan, one is to identify priorities over the next short period, and that's the selectmen's job, to be sure that all of us stay really focused on those priorities during the year. And it's easy to lose track unless we get reminded. The job of the planning board is to try to look much, much further down the line and see where we want to be going. So they have a different time frame. But they're both reviewed annually, they're both updated. One comes out of our local charter. Our local charter says the selectmen have to do their strategic plan. The other comes from the state. In the 1930s, the state noticed that the state was growing a lot, and it was a little bit chaotic, so the legislature passed a law that said every municipality, 351 of them, have to have a master plan. They outline the contents of the plan. They said the topics that had to be in it, what needed to be looked at in order to be sure that our land was well used and that we did have controlled economic development. There's an overlay for the Cape because of the specialness of our region. Our regional Cape Cod Commission is allowed to tell localities, municipalities here on the Cape, how to be doing their master plans, and they chose to call them local comprehensive plans. So that's what we have, but that goes back to the state law. The state tells municipalities what kind of subjects they need to deal with. Next, Peter. So that's why it's there. One is created by the selectmen. They worked with Julian and with an expert that they chose and hired to be sure that it would be facilitated and move along smoothly. The planning board, it's an ongoing process, and it gets updated in pieces. And rather than being approved by only the selectmen, it's approved by town meeting. So many of you are town meeting members. You probably see sections of it coming forward. And the thing when you're looking at it, if you look and you see things that are important to your board, and look how many boards are here today that are important to your board, and they're not here, that's a problem. You need your goals, the things that you think are important to be reflected in this way so that it can be spread across the town. And I guess that was really Sue and the Board of Selectmen's idea in having this presentation, that you look for what's not there, what's missing, that matters. And the next time we're looking at it, your stuff would be here too. And when you look, you'll see your work reflected in it. They're both available online, of course. So there they are.
And touching on where Charlotte finished, looking just at these joint meetings, I mean, it was the vision of the Board of Selectmen from when Doug started, that the purpose of them really begin at the agenda stage, where all of the boards get an opportunity to suggest agenda items. And I really want to commend planning for taking off with this and really asking for this particular focus so that feedback from all of you can be showcased. And then you'll see as we go forward in the agenda, we're taking that the foundation, and then we're looking at specific issues and items. So hopefully we can continue this going forward, and board chairs, if you can, make that an ongoing part of your meetings, certainly I think would help our interactions and our goals get moving, with more conceptual agreement and more success going forward. But I really want to open the floor in terms of, just looking at these, the two plans. I'm pleased that it strikes me there are a lot of commonalities. And so if anyone has another suggestion about something to highlight going forward, or just any comment with the dual presentation, please feel free to kick in. Go ahead, Ken.
Hi, Ken Foreman, Zoning Board. So we have, over the past couple of years, seen quite a few 40Bs coming into town, and one thing I didn't see on this list is an affordable housing action plan. And we've had some workshops on this, and the regulations, as I understand them, state if we can generate 0.75% affordable housing, which is about 150 units per year, we can fend off unfriendly 40Bs. We would need to have a proactive policy for attracting friendly 40Bs. And by that I mean developers who would come in and work with us to produce the kind of project that we would really like to have in Falmouth, as opposed to a project that's designed to maximize the profit for the developer. And I think about possible incentives, some tax abatement, for example, that might attract a developer. If these are rentals, 100% of the units count towards the affordability requirement. So I just didn't see affordable action plan, and we did have one at one time in Falmouth on this list. And I think we should think very hard about trying to craft that or rejuvenate it and make it very explicit, and then have a proactive policy because again, in one of these workshops that we held, we were told about some municipalities that basically had a steady stream of, sort of lined up friendly 40B projects coming in, and so every year their docket was full, and there was no room for someone to come in and do something that wasn't to the benefit of the town.
That's a very good point.
Good point.
Holly?
So our housing production plan that was approved by the state expired in February of 2014. The Affordable Housing Committee went to the Community Preservation Committee asking for funds to hire a consultant to update that plan. That was approved in November's town meeting. Let's see, whenever it was, anyway. So we've been waiting for the housing coordinator to come on board, and she told me last week that the plan is to issue an RFP for a consultant to update that plan by March 1st or so. So we're on the road to that. The former housing production plan, quite honestly, gathered a lot of dust. There were people, the action items in it were assigned to committees and boards that weren't prepared to do that work. So what we're hoping is this new housing production plan will be more realistic, and that we'll be able to reach those goals and have some control. But that is the first piece that has to be in place in order to have control over 40Bs that come looking for comprehensive permits in our town.
Annie, and then Sam?
So I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Holly's saying, but also comment specifically on some of, I'm Annie Conley. I'm a member of the Affordable Housing Committee, but I also used to be the director of the Falmouth Housing Trust, so have actually created affordable housing in this town. All the units that I built as the ED at FHT do ours on the subsidized housing inventory. There's a philosophical jibe here that Jim in his presentation, which was excellent and very detailed, which I compliment the planning board because that's a lot of information to sift through and document and meet and review. So good for them. And you folks care about the SHI, meaning the ZBA, and you do because that's what comes before you primarily, right? The subsidized housing inventory, I'm a housing person, I'm passionate, I'm a human service gal, that's just where my heart leads me. We need them both. We need by right housing options. We need flexible housing, we need a variety of options. The reason we're in the place that we are is we don't have other options for people. We have a very limited stock of housing, and we either have freestanding houses that families grew out of, and now we've got old, I don't want to be unkind, but seniors living there with empty rooms and things like that. There's a lot of that, and then there's a lot of retirees who come and make their dream house for their, hordes of grandchildren to come. And then there's subsidized housing. We don't have a lot in the middle, and that's a problem. And so we need subsidized housing inventory. We need to continue with the SHI. We need to continue with the deed restrictions. We need to continue to follow the state's mandate, because quite frankly, they got the dough. And as a developer, that's a conversation that nobody wants to really talk about, but the details of the money is just like with the Conservation Commission and the 300 Committee when they get land bank money and it ends up being restricted. The devil's in the details, folks. Housing is really complicated. If it wasn't, we wouldn't be where we are. It's not, and people oversimplify it, and it's so frustrating. But we also need to do what Jim's saying, is drive the market, create, areas in town where a developer could come in and we should, the LCP, we can talk about whether or not it's master plan, that doesn't matter. We need a map that says, you know what, here's a good place. It doesn't affect water quality, there's some infrastructure there, it lends itself, unfortunately, along the coastline, where much of our existing infrastructure is and our commercial interests are, it's also in the flood zone. Again, we're back to the money. Can't build those. They're really hard.
Hold on, Jim, Sam asked
So
first.
so I think a meeting like this is excellent. I think it's excellent. I think we need to keep having them. And I'll and then I'm not gonna say anything else the rest of the time, I promise. I'm gonna part with this one thing. I am a town meeting member, and I was so excited to see this accessory apartment bylaw pass. Do you have any idea how hard it is to have a 2/3 vote pass town meeting? It's bloody hard. It takes a ton of legwork, it takes a ton of research, it takes a ton of politicking. I would just encourage everybody here and the folks that aren't here, if you go back and talk to them, please have these conversations and these issues flushed out ahead of time. The accessory apartment bylaw, the planning board worked on it for years. I commented on it for years. All of us did. There's no excuse that we all weren't aware that it was coming down the pipe. Okay, so in that, and
That's ahead in our agenda.
Okay.
I want to move to Sam so we
Okay.
can.
I think the reality is that we rely on private developers to build. That with the exception of the Housing Authority, which has some capacity for managing properties, we rely on private business. So there's always going to be a public-private partnership. And so how do we invite, Ken brings up a good point. How do we invite developers to come in and give us the kind of projects that we want? And it seems to me we have to provide them with that vision of exactly what we would like to see this town to be, the kind of architecture, the kind of landscaping, the kind of overall community or village plan, if you will. And what bothers me a little bit is, it's fine to say the Cape Cod Commission is in charge of our master plan, but I don't see it at the Falmouth level. We don't have a vision for overall land use in this community, and I think we're fighting with each other because we haven't reached a kind of a common understanding of where we want to see the development and where we don't, or what type of development, or what type of residential area. And so until I think we reach that sort of common vision of land use in Falmouth, I think we're going to be struggling against each other. And we have to worry about the environmental impacts. This is not a simple thing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to oversimplify it.
No.
It's a complicated process of working through all of the trade-offs to come up with a vision of what we want to see this town be like over the next, 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years. But I think we haven't really addressed it at that level, and I think we're going to have to if we're going to invite developers to come in and give by right development to certain property owners and what have you. But it's not going to be a simple process, but I think it's a challenge we have to take on. I just want to mention that on Tuesday, I participated in the police department's recognition ceremony, but they also welcomed new officers in. And after it was all very, and they were recognizing officers that did exceptional things to provide us with safe and secure environments in this town. But afterward, I talked to Chief Dunn, and I said, where are those new officers living? And he told me, not in Falmouth. Some of them find a place in Bourne, which is not easy to do, but most of them are living in Wareham and Plymouth. They have to live within a 15-mile radius by the Crow, by civil service regulations. There's police department, and these young officers, their children are there in that ceremony. And you're looking at toddlers and, elementary age kids. They're not benefiting from the quality of schools that we are offering those of us that are fortunate to be able to afford to live in Falmouth. We're really not a whole community like that traditional New England village where had a diversity of people living in the community that provide you with all those services, right? And all those opportunities. And I just want to say that that's my challenge, if you will, in looking at this overall land use concept for the town, is that we need to be thinking about the diversity of needs and economic And that's just the police department. Then you have fire department, you have teachers, you have health workers, and all the other folks that support us in our quality of life.
Well,
Not simple.
that's a good description of what kind
Oh, I'm
of
sorry,
welcome mat do we want to put out.
Just mention
Yeah.
one more thing. I was at the Massachusetts Municipal Association thing, MMA annual meeting. And it's important for us to keep in perspective what's going on around the state and to recognize the opportunities that the state offers us for actually helping us develop some of these things. And I just came across this flyer that's included in the packet from Mass Development Department. And in there, you'll see that Sandwich got a grant to help them develop the concept for their the Sandwich Marina Complex. Well, there's others in here that look at economic development areas in towns and housing areas in towns as well. So the state is struggling with the same problems all across Massachusetts, and they are offering us some opportunities. So if we don't keep our eyes open for grant opportunities to pay for some of these efforts, so we can bring in consultants that can bring them the experience that they have in other places around the country, if not in Massachusetts, we're going to lose the opportunity to use some resources to help us do what the state is trying to do as a whole.
Thank you, Jim.
I've neglected, in my haste to cover everything, we have a major reset plan called the Davis Straits Reset Plan, which is a long-term visioning plan that incorporates all these things. And the biggest component, it's supposed to be a 50-year plan, but we're bringing part of it forward right now. It was also part of the housing project and recommendations, is we don't have a multifamily housing district. Everyone tells us, well, young people need to live in apartments. We don't have a housing district that provides for apartments. It doesn't exist in Falmouth. It's a special permit that you can put into business zone land that goes to 6 or 8 units per acre, but that's all it is. We are encouraging, we're going to be having open discussion on an overlay district, so we won't be away taking people's rights. We're looking at part of the Davis Straits Reset Project, creating an overlay district on a portion of it that might have density in our village center at 10 or 15 units per acre, because that's what the consultants all tell us. At 6 and 8 units per acre, we're never going to get there. We need to have a little bit greater density, and it needs, so you should all take a look at the Davis Straits. It's also on the planning board. It's a long document, it's long visioning, but the part we're bringing forward, I encourage everyone come talk to about, as you see going forward, is the multifamily housing component as an overlay district, and if it works where we think it here, it may be something we could start applying to other areas of the town where appropriate.
And that brings to mind, EDIC had the South Cape developer come in just to talk about, what do why is Falmouth perceived as anti-development? What do you need, if it were Falmouth's goal to have some of these larger projects to, just for example, as Ken was saying, meet the 40B. I mean, South Cape's not really a diverse housing example. But the point is, thinking out of the box. A couple of years ago, we did the Olympic, concept on, I guess it was 151. There are opportunities for, we have housing that Falmouth owns that is not at all dense. I mean, those could be, those are older units that could be, maybe maximize the size a little bit more so we can have more homes. I mean, I think we've got to, look at repurposing. We've got to look at our larger tracts of land. The RTA, transportation, Tom Kerr said, wants towns, come to me. If there's an area of development and you need RTA to service there, happy to sit down and talk about that. So we have all of these resources that we can look at using. Is there anyone who had a comment on this section of the agenda? I don't want to miss anyone before we move on. Okay, thank you. So in, going along with the structure, and again, thank you to Charlotte for, so we take this knowledge and the base of information, and how do we start putting it to work? So the first focus point we have are new or replacement septic systems. And I wanted to see, and Eric, if you could take over.
Okay. This is the water quality report to the joint boards meeting. answering the question of why we care about where septic tank wastewater goes. First slide is here's why. Falmouth has 15 impaired estuaries, more than any other town on Cape Cod. In fact, 40% of all the impaired estuaries on Cape Cod are in Falmouth. They range from up in Megansett, Rand's Harbor, Fiddler's Cove, Wild Harbor, West Falmouth Harbor, Quisset, Green Pond, Salt Pond, Oyster Pond, Falmouth Harbor, Little Pond, Eel Pond, Wacoit Bay, Bowens Pond, 15 impaired estuaries. Now, what impaired means is they've got more nitrogen than is what the kind of life we want to have in these water bodies can stand. So the life we want, the shellfish are dying, the water gets cloudy, the algae have a great time, and the water becomes undesirable for man and beast. And we have 15 estuaries that are in that situation right now. Next slide. Now, they're not all equally impaired. The level of impairment, you can see, varies widely between, frankly, the West Coast estuaries, which are relatively low in terms of the excess nitrogen. But down below, you see the South Coast estuaries that are very high. You're talking about Little Pond, Great Pond, Green Pond, Bowens Pond, Eel Pond, Wacoit Bay. Those are the ones with the extremely high level of nitrogen in all of them. So your Water Quality Committee has been around for a few years, and we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what each estuary needs. And we've come up with a couple of sort of a good news, bad news scenario. A number of our estuaries can meet the TMDL, meaning they can get their nitrogen down to an acceptable level without sewering. Megansett, Fiddlers, Rand's, Wild Harbor, West Falmouth, Quisset, Oyster Pond, Salt Pond, Falmouth Harbor, even Bowens Pond. They can all reach their TMDL without sewering if we do some other things. It's not like a get-out-of-free card. We still have steps to take to make those estuaries whole again. But our concept and our plan is that they will not need to have sewering. Now, there are a few that will need sewering. Little Pond, which we've already done, Great Pond, Green Pond, Wacoit Bay, those three are just so heavy with nitrogen that they cannot begin to address their own problem without some sewering. So we're sort of planning ahead, as Jim referenced, in the years ahead, probably the window year of 2025, when the town has borrowing capacity. We in the selectmen are going to have a proposal for an extended sewering, certainly into the Great Pond area. But meanwhile, what do we do about the 15 estuaries that are already getting too much nitrogen? Well, there's an old saying that when you're in a hole, stop digging. And in every one of these estuaries, we are in a hole. And part of stop digging means that as people build or add on, we want to make sure that they're not going to be adding to the problem that already exists with their septic systems. The accessory apartment bylaw actually addresses that when it talks about the coastal overlay districts, and it talks about people who want to build in those areas in the future for the accessory apartments have to have an on-site septic system with enhanced nitrogen removal. Well, that is a very good thing to have. The catch, and this is the takeaway that we've come here today to request, the catch is that all of our impacted estuaries do not have mapped coastal overlay districts. The missing ones.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Because
Sure.
there's also a very minor, but nonetheless, I think significant, if you go back to that text, wording in this bylaw that, without naming any specific cases, and this is something I've learned from going from the planning board to the zoning board. Planning board with best of intentions writes the bylaw, comes before the zoning board, and clever attorneys, and I know there's some clever attorneys among us, look at that wording and say, aha, I can get around this. This says, on lots subject to provisions of the Water Resource Protection or Coastal Pond Overlay District. The Coastal Pond Overlay District bylaw says if you're 5 lots or 5 acres, you're subject to the restrictions. No single development coming before us is 5 lots or 5 acres. It's highly unlikely. So we've had attorneys argue it's not subject to the bylaw, even though it's within a coastal pond overlay district.
The planning board is here and the planning board is listening. So I think you're on a good track there. But before you even get to that question, the question before us is, we got these 4 estuaries with no overlay district mapped at all. So you don't even need a clever attorney.
Although they're always good to have.
If you can afford them. Anyway, so our takeaway here is, let's at least get these last 4 mapped and on the books by town meeting. So when the clever attorneys show up at your board or any other board, the answer is, yes, you have to install a nitrogen reduction system at this location.
And might we see that coming in April as a,
I think the planning board would be happy to do that, and we would be happy to see
Shouldn't
it.
that bylaw be for all systems and not just singling out an affordable housing, an accessory
Oh, no.
apartment? Should be
all.
for everybody.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That would be an
Yeah.
excellent
It
improvement.
goes for everybody,
Absolutely, yeah.
not just because you want to turn, we felt singling out the accessory apartment to bear this load is a teeny little pebble. It's really, should be everybody.
We agree.
We need to look at it.
We agree.
and that, Ken, that would answer your question. So in terms of coordination, we've already made some great steps here.
We, for many years on ZBA, we have, at least I think several of us have felt strongly it would be great to strengthen the zoning bylaws, to really incorporate some teeth for asking people to put in, improved on-site systems. The argument always was the systems aren't good enough, but I actually think now they are good enough. And we've made big progress on that.
Okay, so first Doug, and then Eric and Jerry.
I really think the next thing that we need to do is implement denitrifying septic systems for all redevelopment on our coastal areas. We need to put that in place right away, because all the little cottages are getting turned into big houses. It's an excellent opportunity
Absolutely.
to ask them to improve the septic, And now with this new layer cake system, all they're gonna have to do is lift up the field, keep the tank where it is, possibly, and just put that, mixed base under there to create that nitrifying effect. So that's something we really need to do quickly. And at some point, we're probably gonna have to ask all the owners, even if they're not redeveloping, to upgrade their septics in some way when they're in these coastal areas, because otherwise we're probably not gonna really meet the TMDLs that we need to get to. Maybe we can have some kind of interest-free loan program or something to help incentivize.
Eric.
Your committee is looking into the granular details of that very concept, because you're right. If you're gonna be asking a lot of people to do this kind of thing, to upgrade a system and spend a lot of money on it, you better have a way that they can finance it that's tolerable, and you have to be asking them to install a system that actually does a lot of good. I wish we could say that the currently approved systems that the state has allowed do a lot of good. They do some good, but they don't do as much good as we need, frankly. The best they get, and we spend a lot of time on it, the best we get right now is they reduce the nitrogen load by half, which is good. Half is not good enough. Falmouth has been involved in the West Falmouth Nitrogen Reduction Septic System Demonstration Project with the Coalition for Buzzards Bay. We've actually installed the cutting-edge, state-of-the-art systems from around the country in West Falmouth, in the ground, to see what actually works in Falmouth and how well it works and how much hassle it is for the homeowner and for the town. There is no magic bullet here. These systems, the best we've seen might get you 3/4, which is going to have to be the best. But there's maintenance issues, there's operational issues, there's cost issues. We're picking away at all of them, because the hope is by the time we are in a position where we have to do it in a large scale around all these estuaries, we'll have the questions answered that says, yes, it's a good system, good enough to do Falmouth some good, and yes, it's affordable, and yes, we don't have somebody coming to your house every month to poke at it. There's a lot to this. I wish it was just sand and sawdust,
No.
but there's a lot more to it, and Falmouth is going to be the first place that actually answers those questions. The state of Massachusetts is very good about throwing around regulations and requirements. They are not good at all in actually providing answers that work in your community. Falmouth will have the answers that work in this community.
And our water quality committee is responsible for that, because the way it happens is even regionally at the Cape's Water Quality Collaborative, which Ray is now a member of, these projects get, vetted, and the decision is made as where should the money go. And time after time, Falmouth has been shovel-ready, had the research, had the plan. And so it, just echoing what Eric has said, this is kind of ground zero for what's the best bang for the buck, what's the most efficient, where is it most efficient, how can we fine-tune these? And it's happening, and so we're right in the position to get the best benefit of that. Jerry?
Going back a couple of the overlay districts, I've asked, and people says it's a good idea, but no one's come forward. Make the impaired waterway, do away with coastal overlay districts and water protection districts, and make it the impaired waterways. That's mapped by the state. It covers the important water quality areas. It's encompassing, it's not the entire town, but it's a way to move it forward. The other thing is, I think we have to be very careful until we have an implementation plan to say what level of septic tank effluent is acceptable. It's been on the board for 20 years. There hasn't been a system that's proved acceptable to individuals for that many years. So what looks good now may not be needed or may not work, even if it works for 3 or 4 years. So we have to have, I put my regulatory, this is the number, 10, 15. You have to meet it. How you meet it is up to you. And I think without a comprehensive water management plan, we can't, we shouldn't specify a level of nitrogen removal. And we may have to think about 2 levels. You have the things that are closer to the coastal waterways and the ones that are way upland that will remove nitrogen through attenuation. So, that's going to be a hard sell. Why am I in or why am I out of the advanced or the super advanced level of nitrogen removal?
Can I just ask you to back up one slide? Where the language was. So, speaking to this issue.
Steve, for people that
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm Steve Rafferty, and I'm on the Board of Health. And so, any on-site septic systems have to come before the Board of Health for approval. And the first barrier, as it's been alluded to, the regulatory barrier is Title V, and then whatever the town does adopt. The phrase enhanced nitrogen removal will take a lot of careful crafting by clever lawyers working with the town, as well as perhaps the Board of Health, so that's a very flexible, forward-looking definition. As the technology continue to improve, that we don't have to keep coming back and rewriting it, because we learn we can get, currently you can get a system that will get down about 19 milligrams per liter. The demonstration projects are showing numbers lower than that. People are continually working on that. So the regulatory framework outside of us at the state, and where we're going as sort of a lead community to address this issue, I think we can be very intelligent and very clever if we all work together, which is that cooperation level further down, to make sure that we have a good phrase for what enhanced nitrogen removal expectations are required.
That's a great point, and I think it really falls to staff to drive that and organize it so that, does it go to Board of Health first? Does it, when can ZBA, kind of read it and give some edits or questions so that process really meets all of the expectations, and we try to build a better mousetrap so that the lawyers can't wiggle around it too much. Mr. Zweig?
Ron Zweig, I'm on the Water Quality Management Committee. Thank you. I'd just like to look at the energy dimension of this a little bit. I prepared a few slides, but I won't put them up because it takes all time. In 2005, the town approved the Falmouth Climate Protection Action Plan. And in that plan, the objective was to reduce energy use by the year 2020 by 10% over 2000 levels. So within 10 years to drop it down 10%. And at the time of, in 2010, Paul Gentile, who was our energy coordinator, put out a report, and he showed that the wastewater alone consumption was about 20% of the total municipal consumption. And Amy Lowell said about 75% is actually used to transport it to the plant, and 75% to get it there by pumping, and 25% for the treatment. So that's the, and that was for about 20% for about 3% of the properties in town, roughly 700. So 3% of the properties basically used 20% of the municipal energy use. So now when we add the Little Pond system to it, this is a little bit of a correlation, but the Little Pond system goes from 700, it adds 1,450 properties. So it's 2,150. And that would be about 9% of the town, roughly, in terms of the properties. But the energy consumption, the percentage of municipal, based on the previous calculations, is close to 46% of the town's total energy use, by going from about 6 million to about 8.5 million, say, and then the 4 million for the sewer. So it's so that's another factor. We have this objective. So by 2019, the sewer system with Little Pond would be using, let's say, 40% of the municipal use. So it's a huge energy consumption to run that. So I think these other points about looking at lower cost, lower energy demanding and more cost-effective systems is obviously the way to go, because even the way it stands now with the previous sewered area plus this new Little Pond sewer service area, it's a huge drain or use of energy. And so as we move forward with thinking about Great Pond and Green Pond and the South Coast areas, the priority should be clearly on minimizing energy use to meet the town's objectives, if we can.
That's a great point. We're looking at that for all the town infrastructure. Why not sewering as well? Doug, you had a point, and then next.
Just something related to energy use also. How many people are aware of the Cape Light program where they'll come out and insulate your house and you only pay 25%? Many of us, maybe. Could you raise your hand if you know about it?
Yes.
I think a lot of people don't know about it, and I think as a town we should help promote that. But if you're a renter, they'll come out and do it for free. No charge. So we need to promote that as well.
Go.
Could we go back one slide? So we've been talking about bringing up the coastal pond over. I wanted the coastal pond overlay map. That. And if you look at that,
Oh, could you say your name? Sorry.
John Waterbury on
Yes.
both the Board of Health and Water Quality Committee.
Thank you.
If you look at that over pond district map, it's about 75% of the town. And we're talking now about adding a couple more. And where those lines go, they go through the middle of lots. And there's no absolute science about what those overlay districts are. Should we be thinking about simply declaring the entire town a nitrogen-sensitive area, and everybody would be treated equitably and the same, instead of trying to put circles around little places and going through the middle of lots, trying to decide what lot is going to be in the overlay district and what not is not? Let's just declare the whole place a nitrogen-sensitive area and be done with it.
Something to think about. Pam.
With the accessory apartment bylaw, I'm Pam Harding-Barrett from the Planning Board and the Affordable Housing Committee.
Good segue to the next piece of the agenda, by the way. Go ahead.
I was hoping you'd appreciate that. Just wanted to move on. But I think we're doing a great disservice to people who don't have to enhance their septic system, who may inadvertently be in the coastal overlay district, which is clearly the majority of the town. And so somebody who has a home that they can retrofit to make affordable housing for a young teacher or a young police officer is now out because they can't afford a new septic system. They're not adding bedrooms, they're not adding flow, but they can't create an affordable housing unit now because of this district that somehow didn't fit into the bylaw, or at least there was not the understanding in town, because there had been a flurry of applications, but the Board of Health can't approve it if it's in the overlay district. So I believe there has to be a way to allow these units who may have a 5-year-old septic system that works perfectly well, no added bedrooms, again, no added flow, fit the criteria for the home they're presently living in, that could accommodate, either an individual or a young family. And I think we have, with all the best intentions of this bylaw, have now swept that bylaw out of our regs. And I, no, you can't speak. Right
You
now.
have to clarify, when you talk about an affordable housing unit, is it subsidized housing or
Okay,
just
no,
another
this
unit?
is this is not a unit that's going to be in perpetuity, because no one is going to create a
Okay,
unit
thank you.
that, when their heirs inherit it, they have to continue for in perpetuity. But there are many people here who are older folks. It forms a symbiotic unit where you have a younger person that in fact may be able to help out this elderly person who wants to keep their home, and it provides housing at an affordable rate because it's limited by the 800 square feet. And I think we really have to relook how we interpret that, so we don't have to get attorneys involved. It seems simpler when somebody has a garage that's not attached, and maybe they add they have to add a septic system, and it's all well and done. But if you have something within a dwelling that's in that district, then we can't offer that for this community, and we desperately, desperately need it.
Before I call it, I appreciate the building department being here, particularly the building commissioner, and I think if you don't mind just providing us with your sense of how this is working now, and maybe health as well, in terms of, now that we've started and opened the doors to this idea, what do we need to tweak? What else should be done? Would you mind? Thanks.
I think a lot of folks are, I'm sorry, Rod Palmer, Falmouth Building Commissioner.
Thanks.
I think a lot of people were excited by this accessory bylaw. I think that folks assumed that it would be easier than it turned out to be. And it's not just the requirement for area in their septic system and denitrification systems. There's other things as well. Excuse me?
Speak louder.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I think for most people, they thought it was going to be simple, and it turned out not to be simple. So Ollie and myself, over the past several months, have seen people come in. We sit down with them, and we try to be as thorough as we can and explain at least what some of the requirements would be. And so some people are walking away discouraged. It's too much for them. It's too much to revamp their septic system. In some cases, it's the building itself. It's not quite as easy to take a single-family home and convert it into something that has an accessory apartment. Sometimes with older homes, it's challenging. There's the need for a fire separation assembly between the accessory apartment and the main part of the house, so that can be challenging. For those folks that simply want to add an addition to the end of their home, a lateral addition, it's a little bit easier. But some folks have an older home and they want to put an accessory apartment upstairs or downstairs, or incorporate it into the house, and it's challenging. The nuts and bolts of it are very challenging. So we see quite a few people that are discouraged, either by what they need to do to the home, which is regulated by the state building code, or they're disappointed by what they need to do to their septic system, and that it's either impossible or it's financially not feasible.
The health, did you want to weigh in?
Well, John,
John, please.
There is one unintended consequence, and that is Title V. And I'll just read to you what it says. When they're talking about septic tanks, when other than a single-family dwelling, they must have a two-chambered tank or two tanks in a series. So we've already jumped from the domestic Title V system to a special case by making an accessory apartment, which is more than one family unit in a building. And that's not something that, as a Board of Health, we can vary. In other words, the state code says you shall do this. And that is, as the building inspector says, is a major impediment to this process. And Steve, I think, can make a comment about what would be required for water services.
Well, without jumping to that, I'm going to suggest, John, the board has not sat down and wrestled with the accessory bylaw and its impact upon us. And we probably defer to the chair here. I'm just sitting here listening. We need to create an agenda item and work our way through it, because with all due respect, John, there is a specific paragraph in there about both septic tanks and single dwellings, and there's another section about shared systems, each of which cover different configurations of an accessory bylaw. But there's also a very specific section that says if you want a variance of any portion of the regulation, you can come to the Board of Health for a regulation. And we haven't really worked our way through that. So without declaring Board of Health policy sitting here, I think we all have different opinions, but we as a board need to work our way through it if the chair agrees to make it an agenda item.
Yes, Diana Malloy, Board of Health, and we're dealing with the pool regulations in the last few meetings, and unfortunately, when we saw this was up, it was a little past where we could get it on to further investigate what are potential options, how can we support it, how do those two pieces of the regulation come together, and what authority do we have to be able to grant any variances and for what. So I think that's certainly something we know we need to look at, and we'd be glad to get it on as soon as we can get it on the agenda to further discuss. I think we will, even though John and Steve have a lot of experience on the board, I think we may need some other guidance elsewhere to kind of help interpret those two things, put them together, look at what our authority is in those variances. So more to come from our end of things, at least.
And, you know, I think, again, putting to staff the coordination, I mean, looking at the building department's needs and what would make sense in terms of surveying the issues that have come before them with homeowners. Affordability, you know, certainly is something that's always going to be an issue, and there are limitations to how much you can address that. But to, you know, also include as the health gets up to speed on, you know, where they want to go next. I think that's the next thing to look for here. Sari?
Sari Pfeiffer, zoning administrator. When you were reading the regulations, John, it said other than a single-family dwelling. Under the Code of Falmouth and under the bylaw, every accessory apartment is accessory to a single family, and it's not to change the appearance or the right as a single family. So in essence, even though there's another unit, if you will, it's still a single family dwelling. It's not a second dwelling, it's an accessory to a primary single family use. It doesn't change the fact that it's a single family dwelling. So maybe there's something in that word other that a clever attorney could look at.
I want to, Pam, and then I want to kick it back to water quality to move on. Pam?
I'm just going to say, maybe we need to put some sort of moratorium on this bylaw because it's too confusing. I think the realtors in town are looking to help them sell a house that maybe a family member has been using a separate area with a bath and a bedroom and a little living room or something. And the assumption has been, well, this can be converted to an official accessory apartment. And maybe we need to put a moratorium on this bylaw because it clearly isn't working. There was no coordination between, honestly, between planning and the Board of Health and the building department and the ZBA. And I think somehow we need to just sort of step back a bit, fix this, and then move ahead, except for maybe units that are separate and need a site plan special permit.
I think we do have to start somewhere, so I think that, and this is an opportunity to get the first feedback for a new, and Falmouth actually in all of the Cape is one of the few that have been moving ahead with an accessory bylaw. I certainly agree that I think there have only been a couple that have actually worked and passed, and so I think, it is a work in progress, and it can be confusing, and realtors shouldn't be representing things as, sure things. I think, their training probably tells them to, make sure, of course you have to say it depends on the town bylaw and putting the right plan on and all of that. So, I mean, your point is well taken. Doug, did you have something
I
you
just
wanted
was going to say, it's working for a few people, and I think it's okay that it starts off slowly and you have to work out the bugs. I certainly wouldn't go backwards now.
Holly.
One of the problems that I find in general with housing is that it's in so many boards and committees' purview, and I was really glad to see this on here because I haven't been able to figure out, no matter who I speak to, what's been going on with the accessory apartment bylaw. And is there a way for us to communicate amongst each other without having to have big meetings like this, on
Saturday.
Is there a way that we can know how it's going with the Board of Health trying to figure this out? How many applications have come in? How many are actually getting through? I have no idea of that, and I've been really trying to focus on it. It's so much work to.
So one of the things, it's not ideal, but I know that the town website currently allows you to sign up for receipt of certain agenda and minute items. So at this point, unless someone knows an easier, more streamlined system, I know I try to kind of watch out for these. Sari, thank goodness, sends the Board of Selectmen some of the agenda items, which, our board is working on. How do we, when we're requested to, or given the opportunity to take a position on a certain item, how does that work timing-wise with our board schedule, and how do we actually implement that? So that's something, that I know as chair I want to try to continue to work with, but right after Sam. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say, a big part of this is the criticality of our town staff.
Yes.
We really need them to be the people that distill this and coordinate it and harmonize it. And I think, my bid to try to get ourselves an economic development director as a department over the top of the building commissioner and the Board of Health and the planning department was an attempt to try to coordinate all this so that everybody could kind of be cautioned. Hey, do you realize that this accessory bylaw is going to require cooperation from the health department and the building department? We need that common, if you will, oversight that helps coordinate all of our volunteer activities. And I just want to say, I think that the town managers are actually moving to do that on a functional level, even though we don't have a specific position called the Director of Community Development or Community and Housing Development. So I think we're moving in that direction. However we do it organizationally remains to be worked out. But I just want to emphasize the importance of staff, and I'm so glad to see them here today as part of this discussion so that they hear the kinds of things that we're struggling with. And we have a coordinated support system in terms of how we're going to implement all these regulations and policies and what have you, because we rely on them to be the boots on the ground.
Ms. Malloy.
Given the goals of the accessory apartment as well as the complicated nature of it all, would it make any sense to request a task force of those representatives to come together and be able to bring back to the boards, here are the issues that have come up, or feedback, here's the investigation that we've come up with, how do we then work with that and try to make some adjustments? I mean, would it make sense at this point?
Julian, what do you think?
Happy to make that happen and follow the lead of the Board of Selectmen if that would be desirable.
We'll further that. I think it's a really good, idea in terms of getting this done within a quicker time period.
And honestly, I mean, you don't know what each other's dealing with, and as far as your priorities, as well as what is the discussion happening here, and what is the discussion happening here, and what is the frustration, putting all those together is not as easy as you know.
Absolutely. Annie, and then I want to move
Really
this
brief.
to water
I'm glad
quality.
Sam brought up the staff. I think that that's a key link in the communication chain, if you will. And frankly, it's been missing, The other piece that's important is we need to reestablish some street cred with town meeting. If we're gonna change a bylaw, a zoning bylaw, if we're gonna edit it or change it or create an overlay district or declare the whole town, we're gonna have to go back before town meeting and say, hey, this is the deal. And so I think a working group is an excellent idea. I think it brings representation from a variety of stakeholders, and hopefully those stakeholders have some clout with their different subgroups, if you will, at town meeting, because that's where this all ends up. And we have to, we all have to be better at going there and saying, yeah, this is what we want, and this is why we want it, and we've all talked about it and fleshed it out and agree.
Ollie?
I just wanted to answer Holly's question. If she requested a list from the planning department for every application, they're subject anyway to the planning board for a site plan review. So she'd be able to get the information for all the applicants that have gone through so far, which I believe is about 6.
That's a good,
Planning board. Yeah, planning department.
good suggestion.
Madam Chair, my
Yes.
understanding is 6 have been submitted, 4 of the 6 have been approved.
All right, so
Since the
that's where
bylaw
we're
was
at.
adopted.
I
Two
would-
are- 2 are still pending.
Okay, so I want to move to a little bigger item, which is our existing capacity for wastewater, and look at what we should be thinking about in terms of policies going forward. How do builders know what we actually have for capacity? What should be the types of development that we want to prioritize? What should be the means for, trading capacity perhaps from one part of town to another? Pardon?
Can I make a quick point
Please.
on the accessory
If
dwelling?
you could introduce yourself, sir?
Yeah, I'm Dylan Fernandez, state rep for Falmouth, Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. Nantucket, their average home price is $2.4 million right now, and they've been tackling the issue of affordable housing for decades. They have not only accessory dwelling bylaws, they have secondary dwellings, they have tertiary dwellings. They have now a tiny home bylaw as well. And so they've been working on these issues for years. I think there's a lot that we can learn from their efforts over the past couple of decades. So when that working group gets established, may I suggest that I coordinate with that group and connect them with some of the planning folks and some of the folks on Nantucket to talk about kind of that shared ideas and what worked over there and what we can maybe replicate here in Falmouth.
So we're not reinventing the wheel. Very
Yeah.
smart. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yul Hopkins, planning.
Pardon?
Yul Hopkins from the Vineyard here is a planning guy.
Oh, yes, we should recognize Yul Hopkins from Planning the Vineyard. Thanks for coming, and we'll continue to work that connection. Thank you. Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Lowell. I'm the wastewater superintendent for the town. And I was asked to come to this meeting because the relatively new flow neutral bylaw has a section that discusses allocation of available capacity, meaning sewer system capacity in the sewer service areas. It says the wastewater superintendent shall periodically notify the board of selectmen, in this case a whole lot of boards at the same time, the available capacity of wastewater treatment facility, and the selectmen in consultation with the planning board may set priorities for that capacity. So I'm trying to simplify here in one slide what is actually a pretty complicated question. The capacity of the wastewater system is limited by the discharge limit in our groundwater discharge permit for our treatment plant. So the capacity of our wastewater system is not at this point limited by our treatment capacity or by our collection or transmission system capacity. It's limited by our groundwater discharge permit, which right now the groundwater discharge permit is limits our flow, our discharge from the plant to 710,000 gallons per day. And it also says our discharge permit, like all the other discharge permits in this, groundwater discharge permits in the state, says that when you get to 80% of that number, which in this case would be about 568,000 gallons, you're supposed to begin planning to notify the state how you're planning to meet those flow limits in the future. So basically the state who issues our groundwater discharge permit doesn't want us to go all the way up to our capacity and then say, ooh, now what do we do? They want us, when we're at 20%, to start planning for the future. Approximately 530, there's approximately, 53,000 gallons per day capacity remaining before we need to begin planning for additional capacity within our existing service areas, meeting because of that 80% requirement. And there's about 195,000 gallons per day capacity remaining before we actually hit that 710,000 gallon per day limit. We just my rough estimate of where we are relative to that number based on the kinds of the projects that I'm aware of that are in the works. The total of the proposed development and redevelopment projects that I'm aware of, and I've gone through the Zoning Board of Appeals, or I asked someone to go through the Zoning Board of Appeals list of projects on that are on their table. That's approximately 70,000 gallons per day in Title V flows. Actually, for our wastewater planning purposes, we don't, Title V flows, but flow estimates based on Title V are very conservative. We don't actually end up seeing that level of wastewater flow from a development. So I'm estimating what we would actually see from the series of developments that are currently on the table is about 35,000 gallons per day. And that, when I'm talking about that 70,000, that's including things like Liberty Green and a number of redevelopment projects on Main Street, like 557 Main Street, 661 Main Street that was recently redeveloped. I'm just, because this is a large group and it's a complicated subject, that's the simplified version of where we are relative to capacity.
And I know that there are a lot of folks who have homes who have put in requests to be connected. That's kind of another issue. And one of the things that I have some concern about is that, I think it would be informative if we had a policy as opposed to, just at some point we're going to be informed of where we're at. It seems, like we might, it might be helpful just to, take hold of that and make a policy that, maybe encourages development in certain places or just make that part of our planning. Doug, did you?
I just have a quick question. I understand it's the discharge that controls us. If we were to find a discharge, say an outfall or some solution, what about the expandable capacity of the plant itself to treat?
So that's a very good point. The reason our discharge is our limiting factor right now is actually based on nitrogen. The nutrient limits are really what limit our discharge, and that's because our discharge is to the ground, and the groundwater flows towards the coastal ponds, and those coastal ponds each have a nutrient limit. So if the town did ultimately find or get an outfall approved, or if the town did go to a membrane treatment system at the plant, or if the town did find a discharge entirely outside of the town of Falmouth, then those discharge limits are dramatically increased, and this kind of limitation goes away. But right now, because our discharge is to the ground within the town, our discharge is limited by our nitrogen, the pounds of nitrogen in our wastewater effluent.
And Amy, would you just tell people who might not know at home, what does outfall mean?
An outfall is a pipe that would discharge wastewater out into, for example, Buzzards Bay or Vineyard Sound.
So I guess you missed my question. Assuming that we could find a discharge, what would be the expandable capacity of the plant itself? How much more could we handle up there?
Oh, I see. The plant right now is designed to treat up to 1.2 million gallons per day, and it's expandable to 1.4. That, of course, could also, you could expand on that site for more. But what the design capacity of the treatment plant right now is 1.2 million gallons a day, and our discharge limit is 710,000 gallons per day. So obviously, we can treat more than we're allowed to discharge right now because of the nutrient limits.
Do you have a ballpark idea of the new sewer area, whether it would push us over the plant capacity?
What new sewer?
Assuming that we could find a discharge site.
What new sewer area?
Yeah, the Great Harbor area. I don't know if you're aware of the mapping that they've done.
Yeah, that is in the very beginning stages of planning, so I don't really think I can talk about that yet.
But that's what I'm talking about in terms of policy. I think we have to ask these questions now. Ken?
Yeah, so the 35,000, you said 35,000 gallons, that's projects currently planned, or is that a build-out analysis for the current sewer districts?
It is just projects that I am aware of that have been proposed, and projects that are proposed, things like Liberty Green and 5C.
Right. So again, clearly wastewater and nitrogen are large local concerns, and from the point of view of a permitting authority, I guess what I struggle with, and I think some others on the board struggle with, zoning board struggle with, is we see a current project coming in. Do we need to, should we be considering not only whether this project puts us over the limit, but what about some project down the line we don't even know about yet? Is it a sort of a first come, first serve, situation, or should we say, if we analyze the potential build out at the kinds of densities that are being proposed for both, multi-family districts, other potential, 40B type projects down the line, et cetera, vacant lots, whatever, we really only have room for X number of units at a certain density, and therefore we should limit density to that.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, and to look at the window of opportunity coming up, we've got to plan for whether that includes a new treatment plan. So we have to look at all of these issues now. Ken's bringing up the perfect point. Jerry?
Just to go on that, and the future and there's the current. There's been, I think, a federal law, a federal appeal settled something. If you have available capacity within your sewer service area, we cannot deny it. Now that means available, not capacity that's been spoken for, but this 53, that's why you could say we need some type of policy to guide all the boards. But I don't think we should assume that we can arbitrarily deny someone from connecting into the sewer system. And I'm saying available, you could say reserved capacity, you could say excess capacity. I don't like that excess word. So I think you have to, when you establish a policy, make sure you understand what we can limit. We can't violate the permit, obviously. We can't violate nitrogen going into repaired estuaries from septic tanks or even into Little Pond Harbor. But other than that, we can't deny people, and I'm asserting that, but I'm sure you people will look into it, if there's available capacity.
Holly?
Does it make sense to have a section of the housing production plan address this, so that it can be laid out as to what the capacity of the town is, what the potential capacity would be if we were to go to an outfall or other discharge areas, maybe that's a place for planning for this. Maybe before that study is complete, it should contain all of the information we have and the ideas of what we could do as a town. Because it's all about housing, right? It's that,
Absolutely. See ya?
But, excuse me, it's not all about housing. I think we have to worry about business activities as well.
Right.
And that's why I think it needs to almost be a land use issue, and then under that production, housing production. So it's not just housing. We have to worry about, and even recreation requires irrigation at times and things of that sort, which contributes to nitrogen loading. So we got a broader image, I think, than just housing. I know that's your advocacy, and rightfully so, and it's mine. It's a priority, right? But I think we have to have that land use perspective as well as housing, which is a critical element to. Excuse me.
See ya?
So Amy, I just have a clarifying question. When you did the calculations for that capacity, did that include all the future hookups in the Little Pond Sewer Service Area?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's after Little Pond. And did you include the developments that are planned there, or just did you use the numbers from the initial planning study?
I used the, basically for the Little Pond Sewer Service Area. So like I said, this is a little more complicated than I made it sound here. The current, my estimate of where we are right now includes an estimate of what the flow will be to the plant from the Little Pond Sewer Service Area in the next couple of years when all of the properties that are within that are connected. And that number is based really on existing water use for the existing uses within the Little Pond Sewer Service Area. Because so my number down here of 70,000 gallons per day, that includes an estimate for the Little Pond, the Spring Bars Road development, Helmus Circle. These things are all part of, they're on the table. So this is a little bit of a challenge for me. I'll say the way these come to me is a lawyer or a developer will come to me, or I'll get a referral from the zoning board. And the question is there capacity for this project? And I don't set priorities for capacity. So the question is, where are we now compared to our limit? And the answer so far is we have capacity. And that's really as far as I can go in that discussion right now. But the board, the zoning regulations and the policies that you all put in place really I would set those priorities. I'm really just asking a question of, do we have the capacity? And right now the answer is yes. At some point, if all that's on the table and all, over the next few years, if everything that's under discussion gets built, the answer might be no, we don't have any. But that's where we are right now.
Okay, so let's get down to the weedy patch here just a little bit. I just happen to be totally opposed to outfall. I don't like dumping my problem out in the sea because then it becomes others' problems. So having stated that, what kind of time frame, if you would go to a membrane system, which I haven't a clue what that means, except that membranes usually clear things up. If you were to go to a membrane system, what kind of time frame would you need to do the addition onto the current treatment plant? 10 years, 5 years from the initial planning to the full fruition of it, because most governments, I'm not faulting them, it just happens to be most families operate by crisis management. Uh-oh. And I don't want to hit uh-oh because this determines housing availability, it determines economic development if we hit the uh-oh and we can't do any further. So what kind of time frame do we have to start planning ahead for the increase in the treatment plant?
Well,
I would think so.
Yeah, I think right now, and I think that, with the input of all of the boards coordinated by staff, I think that's another agenda item. I see Julian's taking note for the Board of Selectmen. Eric.
Just so you know, at the next Water Quality Committee meeting, we're having two presentations. One on outfall and the legal and practical status of that, and the other on the MMR option, which Ray has been bird dogging for a while here, that possibility of piping it up to the discharge site they have up there, which has huge capacity, but
Which is the
it's
base.
10 miles away. Anyway, we're looking at those two out-of-town options, and in the weeks ahead, we'll be looking at a few of the land-based in-town options that are on the map. So in the next couple of months, we'll have a pretty good picture of what the town's options are for discharge sites.
Great, ahead of us, appreciate that. Go ahead.
Just if I can swing back, we talked earlier about a Davis Straits zoning planning board change. I believe that's premised on the fact that they are contiguous to the sewer. Is there an estimate of what that will need in terms of sewer capacity, so that we don't rezone or redo something through the planning board process and then come up short on treatment capacity? Is that, hopefully that's part of the planning process.
Good point. Ron?
Sort of following on that note, to my recollection, if you build something and there's a sewer line that goes past that development, you have to hook up. Right? So keep that, I mean, that's a town bylaw. You have to hook up. So keep that in mind, folks.
And again, this is a good example of the fact that, we're relying on staff to help coordinate, just like the accessory bylaw, in terms of trying to cover as many bases as we can to anticipate what could be the problems in the future and to account for that now. And I'm not going to say lawyers are good for that, because I want to just segue.
Madam Chair, could I just interject one item if I may?
Yep.
And perhaps our Public Works Director, Ray Jack, I'm pleased he's with us as well, it might be appropriate to make a couple of comments. But I just wanted to interject in this helpful discussion, just to remind everyone that the town, neither this town or any other, has unilateral authority to implement and undertake in a vacuum the kinds of things we're talking about enhancing capacity, expanding capacity. We are in an extraordinarily heavily regulated situation by both the state and the federal government, speaking of wastewater, water as well, but wastewater in this situation. And we have a comprehensive wastewater management plan that periodically has to be negotiated. And the significant limits which Amy Lowell spoke about earlier came about as part of this regulation, even though the taxpayers of Falmouth supported the design and construction of a plant with 500,000 gallons of additional capacity. We're not able to use those because of regulatory issues that are very profound. So I just wanted to bring in that reality into this that complicates this situation even further. We need to be aware of it, that it's not just about what we would like to do or even what we might have the resources to do, but we have an entire framework through which we have to filter all of this literally. And I don't know, Ray, if you want to comment on that, Madam Chair, if I might just briefly.
And as he goes to the podium, that's part of the tools that these committees and boards are asking for. So I think it's a matter of making sure the information and guidelines or limits gets to the point where ZBA can do their job, because they know where the hard limits are, or or the health department. So I think it's a matter now that we are finished with a terrific job in terms of construction, on time, under budget. Now we've got to have more guidelines about working with it. Right.
Let me just explain capacity in a broader sense. It really has three components on wastewater. You have the capacity with regard to a discharge permit that the state allows to the receiving waters or the receiving land. You have the capacity of design of the plant itself, which in this case is 1.2 to 1.4. So we've always been well ahead of the curve on the design capacity of the system, if you will. Then that brings you to the third component, which is the collection system itself. It has capacity issues and limitations associated with it, because you have pipe sizes to serve a geographic area, as well as lift stations designed specifically to pump a specific volume of wastewater. So to give you that example, the original sewer system that was designed in the downtown area here, the lift stations are very large. The pipes were oversized to accommodate additional growth for the future. And that's what we always do, and that is what is appropriate, to try to give all of you the opportunity to make your own decisions. If we stood up here right now and said there is no capacity, well, guess what? There's no decisions to make because you're not going to have any growth. But speaking of that, I think in the other context, it's which came first, the chicken or the egg here. You have a wastewater system that does have capacity and is always going to be designed with some level of capacity for the future, but we're going beyond development. We're entering redevelopment. And redevelopment is generally more intense than development ever was. So the bottom line really is going to be, if there's going to be growth in the town, then to what degree is that growth going to occur? Where is that growth going to be centered? If it's going to be in a very tight geographic area, we can accommodate that for all future planning purposes. But without knowing if we're going to have growth centers and what other geographic areas we may have to accommodate, it's just going to be a bit more difficult. But we've been working closely with the Water Quality Management Committee for years. And even right now, on the next possible phase of sewering, we are looking at the capacity issues there and what would the future hold beyond 20 years. And further on that, we are presently going into that wastewater plan by December of 19 is when we have to start going to the state on what we plan to do to accommodate future areas of the community and how that's going to be. Is it going to be sewering? Is it going to be a combination thereof of other alternatives? And so that's kind of where we are, but
Appreciate that. That's a really good overview and you know, gives us an idea of what, you know, how far you're already ahead on this. Doug?
Is there additional capacity at the plant that serves Silver Beach?
see now there's a great example. That's an independent wastewater system, so it has its own collection system, its own treatment plant, and it has its own discharge site. There's some limited capacity in there now, but once again, that plant was built with expansion capacity for the future, so it is capable of being expanded, if that's what the town chose to do.
Sam?
Yeah, in response to Pat's comments about sort of opposition to discharge's approach, I taught a course in environmental systems where I looked at the whole biosphere. I mean, the nitrogen we create, and it's going to be created. The question is, how does it get attenuated? How does it get converted? And I think you have to recognize that an outfall is just bypassing the estuaries. And the question becomes, is that a legitimate strategy to handle the nitrogen that we're producing, which is going to be produced one way or another, and it's going to be attenuated one way or another. The ocean does a pretty phenomenal job of attenuating nitrogen. And in fact, if you look at where the algae grows in the oceans, it's really within 200 miles of the coasts. And that's because that's where all the nutrients are, the nitrogen is. And that's where, in fact, most of the photosynthesis of the world takes place, where it's just producing our oxygen, right? So if you look at the planet as a whole and ask yourself, where should the attenuation take place? Well, if we've overloaded our estuaries, maybe we need to consider a bypass to bring those levels down in terms of our management of the human impact to this planet. So I would hope that we don't just rule out these possible options, look at them critically. And I don't say you shouldn't accept what I'm telling you, but I've looked at the planetary level of nitrogen and carbon dioxide and other phosphates and those kinds of chemicals that are part of the biosphere. And I think we have to look at it at that level and not be too prejudiced about not doing this because we somehow or other think we're dumping our waste into the ocean. The ocean's going to get it one way or another.
Ron, and then I want to wrap.
Just one quick thing. There's a state law that prohibits us doing that. So that's something we have to do as a council. Understand. We'll change that.
You know,
Change the law.
part of the agenda today. Sure.
There is a state law that governs outfalls. It was amended a couple of years back to allow a certain quality of effluent
to go out on outfall. So outfalls are not banned by a state law.
Are you
The
saying
quality of the effluent is limited by into the outfalls.
For Vineyard Sound and Buzzards Bay? No?
Yes.
In any event,
Yes, yes,
the
yes.
last two agenda items I want to really leave with folks. We have been interspersing the best practices to receive and give input on another board's hearing or agenda. You know, part of the premise, as I started the meeting with, is that if there is something, a practical issue that you think needs coordination with other boards, you know, this is one way to do that. Certainly just send an email to request an agenda item. In terms of other potential focus points, I mean, if there's anything that comes to mind now from anyone where you feel like this forum would be a good idea to, you know, further a particular topic. Annie?
I was thinking about this, you know, when I was getting ready coming here. And obviously, you know, I think back on things, you know, my experience. And so when I was permitting 40Bs, there was a staff review, right? So there was a commentary. And Suri coordinated it. It went out to all the departments. You know, sometimes went to departments that frankly weren't even impacted, but it was a policy. And I wonder if when we're doing zoning changes like that, we don't institute something similar, so that, you know, we're all getting a shake and a review of it. Obviously, well ahead of town meeting. We'd hate to see the planning board or other entities be working away for months and months and months, and then, you know, get thrown a curveball.
You know, right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but
No,
I,
that's
you
a
know,
great idea.
I feel like, you know, just a, that's it, this is how we're gonna do it. And I think it also would be something that would be appreciated by town meeting, frankly, you know, cause there's a lot of people that give their time, it's long, it's late. Some of us who have kids, you know, you're hiring a sitter, you're, you know, getting there, and then to be hashing things out, you know, there's a little discussion about democracy and all that, but truthfully, you know, there's no reason we don't hash it out beforehand. And for those of us making the policies and the proposed changes, it's appreciated, frankly.
So, Julian, I wonder if you could send out a request to all board chairs for some feedback on that suggestion.
Certainly.
Eric?
We'd support it. There's nothing better than going to town meeting where all the boards who have an opinion have already expressed it before the article got there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it gives us an opportunity to ask questions and do some research that folks at town meeting would already have, and I think that would encourage more support. And, you know, you always need that outreach in many different ways, and that's just another way to do it. Is there anything anyone else would like to say before we adjourn?
So,
Please. Oh, hey, Mike, sorry.
I'm
Introduce-
Michael Lasso with the Falmouth EDIC, no longer chairman, but still a board member. And from listening from this discussion and from actually talking with members of the planning board over the last few years, it sounds like we're at the point where we need a comprehensive community land use plan that really shows where we want to put density, where we want to grow, where we want to put our community facilities in the future. In the future, we're going to need a new town hall, and there's other things that we need. But we need a comprehensive land use plan that shows all that will help us calculate how much more sewer we're going to need and where it's going to go. So I don't know what it's going to take for us to finally get to that point where we end up doing a comprehensive land use plan so that it takes the guesswork out of, for developers, where they should be putting projects, where there's going to be public facilities. It's a big task, but I think we're at that point where we really need something like that.
I agree. Good point. Jerry, last comment?
I want to thank you. I had very cautious optimism that there'd be any dialogue, that would be talking heads, and I appreciate it. I think the format went very well. I know time is limited, but there's probably a number of other boards that aren't as visible that may like something similar, and where they have an opportunity to get together and exchange with the selectmen and the other boards that they interact with. So I would encourage it.
That's a good point. And in fact, Julie, maybe if you could put an email just letting all of the boards know, it certainly is the Board of Selectmen's intention to be open and appreciative of dialogue from all of the boards. So I just want to focus that. Jim?
Yeah. I never get ideas sitting alone, but in a big group like this, my mind goes, I get a lot of ideas from everybody. When Title V first passed, I remember I was hit with a $10,000 bill to update my system because I was on Green Pond and I had to do it. But my accountant told me that the state had a state tax credit that I could get $2,000 back a year for the next 5 years, and the state paid for my new Title V. Why don't we take a look at these enhanced nitrogen systems, see if we can develop it, take it to the state and see if they could do the same thing, because they did it with Title V. I know when I put in my Title V system, the whole thing, 5 years later, the state paid for the whole thing. It wasn't that hard to do, and maybe that's a solution we could do.
It's eligible, we found out, we've looked at it, it is eligible for that tax credit.
And the sewer.
And we're looking, yeah, so, the Airbnb tax is coming, the short-term room rental tax is coming at the state level, and the Cape and Islands delegation is using this as an opportunity to look at our wastewater problem here. Frankly, you know, the people who come in the summertime and use our short-term rentals, they're flushing our toilets, they're contributing to the problem. So we're looking to not only, you know, from a state perspective, we're looking to level the playing field between Airbnbs and your regular kind of B&Bs and hotels, because right now the tax code is completely inequitable in New England. And in New England, Massachusetts is the only state that does not tax its short-term room rentals. So we're looking to level the playing field there on a statewide level. And then on a Cape and Islands level, our delegation is looking at this revenue opportunity as an opportunity to get more money for wastewater infrastructure for the Cape and Islands. And so what we're proposing, and there's a bill that we've put forward, is to have a small tax, or we'll call it a fee, on top of the short-term room rental fee that the state is already going to put, and to have that fee go towards wastewater infrastructure on the Cape and Islands. And this is a fund, we haven't fully hashed out how different towns are going to pull from the fund and contribute to it. But you know, when you go to Boston, you pay, and you stay in a hotel in Boston, you pay a convention center fee. It's about 1 or 2% of the regular fee that you pay as a tax for staying in that room. That has never discouraged people from staying in Boston, right? And so these people are coming in, they're using our infrastructure, they're flushing our toilets, they should pay a small percentage fee to go towards our wastewater infrastructure, and this is a way to raise money for wastewater infrastructure that's on the backs of visitors and not on the local community. And this would be a fund where communities would have to opt in. So all the Cape communities that have a 208 plan, and every Cape community does have a 208 plan, and even the islands could opt in as well, as long as they establish a 208 plan. And it's a way to raise a lot of revenue regionally, if that's something that the towns choose to do. And if you can raise a lot of revenue as a region, you know, that gives you better bonding and borrowing capacity, and can really get at this, what is estimated as a $4 billion wastewater infrastructure problem on the Cape and Islands. So that's something that we're looking at, something that's coming down the road, and we can get you more details on that at a later point. Just wanted to
Thank you very much.
add that.
Important report. And with that, I want to make a motion to adjourn the Board of Selectmen. All those in favor?
Aye.
Other boards?
Motion to adjourn the planning board.
Second.
Aye.
Adjourned.
Motion to adjourn the Affordable Housing Committee. Aye. Aye.
Motion to adjourn the Conservation Commission. All in favor? Aye.
Motion to adjourn zoning board of appeals. All in favor?
Matt, can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. Pat, I'm sorry.
No, Board of Health, keep working.